And welcome back to ConTinual. And today is on the panel room. We've got a special episode where we're going to be coming in and talking about paranormal media. We're going to be having a lot of fun talking about how do you get on a shows, what's it like to run one of these shows, what makes a good guest, what makes an interesting story, how do you have a little bit of fun doing these. And so I have the pleasure of having people from 3 different shows with me. I'm going to start with Michael Williams, who is a familiar face around here as well. So Michael, you and Charlie are up first.
Great. I'm Michael G. Williams. I am an award-winning novelist. I write science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, much of it set in the South or the Southeast, specifically in the Carolinas. And I'm one of the co-hosts and co-creators, along with Charlie, of Arcane Carolinas, which is a show about the strange and unexplained and paranormal and just off the beaten path weird stuff to be found in the backroads and byroads of the Carolinas.
I'm Charlie Menshaw. I co-host Arcane Carolinas with Michael. Yeah, we made this a couple of months ago, and we've been having a lot of fun with it. We cover folklore, legends, myths, modern weird, all that stuff. I also happen to do the art, so we do title cards for all of our episodes so that we can create some sort of video content because, we started, what we didn't know was that people would want video. So we had to start making art. So I picked that up since Michael does the editing.
All right, and we've got a big crew here from Unearthing Paranormalcy.
Hi guys, we're Unearthing Paranormalcy. I'm Amy.
I'm Dave.
I'm Chad.
And I'm Eli.
We started this podcast about 3 years ago, and we cover everything under the sun, paranormal, esoteric, occult. I mean, if it's spooky, we cover it, and we just try to look at the different ideas of what could cause these things, and we come at it with different perspectives of the believer and the skeptic, and we cover everything from Bigfoot to UFOs and ghosts and everything in between. So,
and last we have Roejen Razorwire from Project Archivist, where I occasionally get pulled in to go play co-host, cause trouble, and then get back out.
As much as I can pull you in. My name is Shannon, but I go under the name Roejen for Project Archivist. Project Archivist is a podcast that I started, I think, going on 12 years ago. And we like to look at, as I like to say, the wonderful, the weird, and the strange. We'll cover paranormal, sometimes true crime. I'm more interested in just going out and finding all of the odd and weird things that are out in the world. And when I do touch on paranormal, I try to dig as deep as I can and find the more obscure stuff. Or if I'm going to cover it, I'll try to cover it in a different way that hasn't been covered over and over again ad nauseum a million times. And pretty much I just do it because I like to learn as many new things as I can as possible. And in the process of learning, try to put that out there at the same time when other people are listening.
So let's sort of talk a little bit about just the mechanics of getting a show done. I mean, I think this is one of those things a lot of people don't necessarily know is there's actual work involved. It's not just show up, run your mouth, and go away, and things magically show up out there on the internet. There's a little bit more to that. So, Ro, I'm actually start with you first because you crank out a ton of content and do a lot of editing work and have helped with some of the things that we've done as well. So from your side, getting started, I know things have changed radically over 12 years. Mm-hmm. So from your side, what does that look like for you putting a show together?
Well, when we first started, the big problem was hosting. I mean, I wasn't one of the people that started in the podcasting. There was definitely people before me. But the big thing was trying to figure out, okay, where am I going to get this stuff hosted? How am I going to record it? What kind of equipment do I need? Where am I going to pull my guests from? What am I going to talk about? Those are, and everybody here has all faced those kinds of things too. When I first started, hosting was really, really expensive. Nowadays, there's all kinds of services that are out there like Podbean and a few other ones that you can get set up and running your podcast for, under $150, $110, and then you can get microphones, and there are a lot of people that are doing it. But when I started, it was like, okay, where are we going to do this for as cheap as possible? Because I wasn't made of money. So how am I going to do this and still be able to put a quality show out there and produce it and all of those kinds of things? Nowadays, getting into podcasting is a hell of a lot easier. You can just go out and find any of these services like Podbean, et cetera, and they'll host it for you. And there's all kinds of people out there that will show you the way. Like a lot of the services now will like, yep, sign up with us. Here's how you get your RSS feed, which is basically your podcast's address. So podcatchers like iTunes, et cetera, know where to find your podcast. Back in the day, you had to go out and figure out what is an RSS. How do I put this in here? How do I get on iTunes? How do I set a blog up to do this? Do I know anybody that can do web developing and stuff? So nowadays it's much, much, much easier. It's much faster. You can be up and running with a show within 2 weeks, as long as you've got your game plan laid out of what you're going to talk about and where your content and stuff's going to come from. So nowadays I look at the people, no offense to anybody that has just getting started. It's like, man, just bless your soul. You've got it so much easier than I did. I kind of have to chuggle, and like the younger generation, oh man, I had to do this, and that. It's like, you have no idea, but great. Go for it. Go do what you're going to do. It's nice that it's a lot easier now. I'll say that though.
Get off my lawn. Oh, wait. Sorry.
Exactly. Yes. I try not to be the old curmudgeon guy, but then again, I'm also like, me, if there's a podcast out there that's new, like, yeah, come on my show, I'll give you a hand. I help you out. So yeah,
So for our crew from Unearthing Paranormalcy, what's it like for you guys? I mean, we can actually see some of your setup here, which is kind of cool. I see the mixing board. Everybody's got the headsets and the mics on. I don't know if how much you guys do with guests versus it's just you guys. I've caught a few of the shows. So what's it like for you guys getting set up and pulling that big of a crew together to come on and do a show?
Well, we live together, so he has to be here.
Marriage.
Dave is my sound guy. He's the one who handles all the board and all that stuff. But basically, we just kind of, even just the beginning of this, we're that young crew that we started out pretty quick and easy. One night, Dave and I were just sitting there and we were like, let's do a podcast. And we were just sat there brainstorming, what will we do it over? And I said, well, I've always been really into the paranormal. I've got lots of personal experiences. So we went at 9:00 at night to Walmart and bought some headphones and we recorded our first podcast. And you can tell when you listen to our first episode how bad it was. And it's been a complete learning experience for us since then. Chad came in on like our third episode, and he's my brother. And then our other brother, Eli, came in on episode like 21 or so. But we've had guests, and some of the guests stick around. I mean, that's both Chad and Eli started out as guests, and they just have become part of the team. Most of the time, our guests will reach out to us through Instagram, Facebook, send us emails and say, hey, we'd love to be on your show. And that's how we started out. And we've got a couple of other podcasts that we actually have worked with multiple times that did just started out as a guest appearance. And now we do show collaborations every once in a while with them. Dave's also our lead researcher. So we pick a topic and he does most of the research, and then we just come and add the banter.
Show up and heckle. That's the one I do well. So, Michael, you and Charlie are kind of pulling the new one here together over the last few months. What's it like now? Because, I mean, I know you've done some stuff in the past, but now you're pulling together. What are you really trying to accomplish with the show now?
Yeah, my first podcast was 5 years ago, and it was, record on my phone and have like a microphone that plugged into it and things like that, and do everything in person. In the current circumstance, the name of which I will not say, we can't record in person. So Charlie and I use Zoom, and I do all the editing in Amadeus Pro, and Charlie does the video editing and puts together the art and things like that. And we host it all in Libsyn. I mean, I podcasted in an era when I did have to learn how to edit the settings behind the scenes in WordPress to make an RSS feed work correctly for Apple and make it work for everybody else. But these days, it's all pretty much just like turnkey stuff. You tell it what platforms you want to appear on, and Libsyn takes care of the rest of it in a way that is really refreshing and fortunate, and did not exist when I started with my first podcast. So
I feel you.
That's been really good.
My first podcast is a different podcast other than Arcane Carolinas that I actually do with Michael, and we started with the lo-fi route, and yeah, it's nice how easy it is now. Going back, dating myself a little bit to terrestrial radio, and I remember when our streaming platform 20 years ago in college was Real Player. So, we had the little tower, little FM tower on campus, and I had my show. And then, the engineer guy was really excited and was like, "Hey, do you want to stream it?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that is." And to be like, yeah, you can use Real Player to like get your stuff into people's dorms. And I was like, sure. So definitely the evolution of audio communication over the internet has been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, being the old guy, when I got started, it was kind of the, ours was not even an FM station; it was AM.
Yep.
And then did some of the cutover. But having started in tech in, not long after the first bits and bytes were drummed out by Stone, audio was a really fun thing to come into in the digital world when you could finally record audio. When it first started to be just rip music and whatnot, and then people went and said, "Oh, I can create my own show. I can share it this way. I can do these things." And before even podcast was a term, before Apple took over the market, the first MP3 players and things like that I had, because I traveled for a living, were this big with a little memory stick that would hold 8 or 12 shows or, a few songs or things like that. But it's changed a lot. And I think one of the things that we see now is that much like e-readers have changed the ability to consume books fast and conveniently, sitting at work or whatnot, jumping on the subway, jumping on public transport, whatever the case may be. Podcasts also are starting to take up a lot of the same space that audiobooks are. So we're seeing a lot of competition there for when people actually got in their cars and went places, they were listening to them. Now I know a lot of people, you're still sitting at home, I'm playing podcasts and whatnot. I know I'm behind on the shows that I usually listen to. But where you guys got involved and started really wanting to be on the other side of the mic, having the conversations, telling the stories, what was it that pulled you in to want to be on that side as to help craft the story? So I'll start on the Arcane Carolinas side, and I'll reverse direction this time.
I don't know that we can exactly tell the story of the incident that I was like, dude, we need to do this.
Okay, this sounds like something that might have happened at a convention or not, but okay.
So we work together and have a separate podcast. And that is very much a professional endeavor and very serious. And we have fun with it, but it's serious. I was driving down the road and saw something absurd and was like, that's definitely not what it appears to be on the surface level. And I called Michael and was like, hey, do you think it would be fun to do a podcast about all the weird crap that you see, like on back roads and by roads, and like tie in like cryptids and like every weird story that you can think of in the Carolinas? And he was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And then he texted me like an hour later and was like, wait, I didn't mean to step on your idea. Did you mean with me or by yourself? And I was like, no, dude, with you. Like, we have
nice to be sure.
Right. We have the equipment. We share interests in paranormal and weird occurrences. So it just seemed to me to be a natural fit, something to do in our off time.
And like as coworkers, we'd had conversations about things like the X-Files, stuff like that we both enjoy. And I thought that the thing you were going to say as the origin for it was last year when my husband and I came back from vacation, and I was like, dude, I don't know exactly how to say this, and don't say it a lot around the office, but we saw a UFO at the beach. And you were like, what? And after that, it was like, okay, no holds barred. I can talk about anything like that with Charlie at work, and hopefully not have my professional reputation besmirched.
And likewise. So they made a mistake and set us next to each other when the whole other half of the office was empty. So we could pretty much talk about anything, and did. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that would really be a better origin story than I saw a weird sign and was like, that's a sex thing. That's a sex thing. That has to be a sex thing.
somebody's hobby definitely has to be a sex thing. But that's true though, that we already were in the middle of producing the latest season of our work podcast and said, why not?
So for our friends from Unearthing Paranormalcy, you guys, obviously there had to be at least some impetus for, all right, let's run down to Wally World and go pick up some equipment, and to keep doing it. I mean, it's one thing to get that initial thing of, okay, this will be fun to go do. You guys have been doing it for more than 100 episodes. Most shows don't make it more than 10 if you're lucky. It's time, it's a commitment. So obviously, and with a crew this big, there's a real reason and a push for doing it. There's a lot of, obviously there's fun in it, but there's got to be something bigger for you guys as well.
It has been an amazing experience when it comes to just, we're in Oklahoma, so we're kind of in this Bible Belt where a lot of the paranormal stuff was very evil and you didn't talk about it. And Chad and I grew up in an extremely haunted house. Things would happen on a daily basis, but we couldn't talk to any of our friends or anything about it because as soon as their parents found out that we were talking about ghosts, and they weren't allowed to come to our house anymore. And so we grew up like that. And as we got older, the paranormal community has opened up a lot, but it was like just having an outlet to talk about those experiences and learn about them and figure out what was it. And then, like I said, we do a lot of occult stuff, and it's always interesting to learn, about, occultists and occultist beliefs and how it ties in, and how it seems like every single paranormal topic we cover tends to tie back to another topic we've covered in the past. And it's just been a fun learning experience.
Another thing is that, like, with specifically, with the occult, there's always a beginning, a middle, but there's no end. So everything that comes into the podcast, whether it's all of us pitching in research or one person pitching in research, it's a constant retainment of knowledge and understanding of every aspect of whatever we are covering. And it's always nice to, like Amy said, especially if we're doing really any topic, really, is to not so much try and justify a different outcome for it or origination for it, but to understand, what all the other possibilities could be, So, I mean, for me, it's more about the retainment of knowledge. Whenever I first came on the podcast, I was invited to come in and do a personal story. And, once I got together and all the energies kind of mixed in, I mean, it was one hell of a margarita. So I just decided to, stay around and, crack a few jokes and get a lot of information in my brain. So.
Yeah, for me, kind of going off what Amy was saying with being in the Bible Belt is, everything paranormal is looked down upon pretty much in our entire lives growing up. And we know at times we felt alone. We weren't, we weren't able to talk about it to anybody. And that was kind of one of the reasonings we kept the podcast going, is being able to reach out to other people and show them, what's happening in your house or what you've had in your life. You're not alone. There's other people out here who have witnessed or been around the same kind of thing. And so it allows people to feel a little bit more open to things they've done in their life or seen in their life. And we've had a huge outcry on our social media groups of people just talking to us. I mean, we have people all the way from Australia that send us messages constantly about, things they've seen and stuff like that. And it's been a lot of fun. And I think that's what keeps me going, is the outcry of all the people listening to us.
So, Ro, from your side, for as long as you've been doing this now, and there's been shifts and changes and things that have happened, and development in the show and whatnot. Obviously, you still got a big drive to go. And I mean, we were talking about offline, you're going a much more serious route. Almost you're pushing that next step forward. So with everybody you've talked about across the myriad of topics, what's still keeping you in it at this point?
Finding new things, finding new ways to approach a lot of these topics. When I first started, what got me into all this is I'd had a variety of paranormal and strange, weird experiences throughout my entire life. And then growing up, I'm 48 now. So when I was growing up, these were things that when you were younger, you just did not talk about. You know, they didn't have shows like Ghost Hunters, and the paranormal wasn't quite looked at the same way. I mean, you had this movie called White Noise, but it was generally kind of a kooky thing that you just didn't discuss with anybody. So I was kind of like this offbeat screwball guy that would go to the library and find as many books on this stuff and Charles Fort and all that as I could. And as I grew older, I just kind of kept all that stuff quiet. And then as I grew older, you discover shows like Long John Neville and Coast to Coast. And, you know, it's kind of a place where you can go and hear about this stuff and kind of be accepted, for lack of a better term. And then as I was getting older, you know, years later, a friend of mine was like, hey, have you ever heard of these things called podcasts? And I'm like, no, tell me more. And then I discovered shows like Mysterious Universe and the 13 Skulls and Eerie Radio, and I started contributing more and more to those shows. I would send them content because I'm like this voracious, weird news hound. Like our Facebook page is just continuously full of strange news stories, etc. And then through listening to those shows and listening to those guests and stuff, I would find myself going, well, I want to know about this, or I want to know about that, or why didn't they ask this question? So at some point, I just said, I want to try to do this. So you cobble together whatever equipment you can find from whatever sources you can find, and you find out what recording programs are out there, and you learn to use this stuff, and then you just jump into it and go. And as you guys have both experienced with your shows evolve over time. You know, the shows that you're doing in the beginning are way different than the ones you've moved along to. So you get to a point where you just go, okay, everybody else is covering that. Everybody else is covering Roswell. Everybody's covering Amityville. Everybody is covering, you know, the Dogman and stuff like that. There's other weird things out there that people haven't heard about and that I'm trying to learn about. So, you know, let's see what we can do with this. Or if somebody comes along and says, hey, you know, I want to talk about this. It's like, yeah, but you've been on every other podcast at this point. Everybody's heard about that. As an interviewer and as a guest, what do you want to talk about with this stuff that you haven't had the chance to talk about yet, that you've been asked 50 million times and you don't want to go? Where do you want to go with this? And let's see if we can go in that direction from there. And for a while we followed the X-Files model where they would do so many serious shows, and once in a while they'd do a really funny show at some point or another. And we also I like to toss like some comedy in my show. I like to keep it somewhat, you know, I like to be the every guy and try to keep it entertaining and throw some funny stuff out there as much as you can, because if you take the stuff too seriously, it becomes very dry and very like, okay, yeah, whatever. So now though, the direction that I'm going in now is I'm trying to put away a lot of the like the really stupid, for lack of a word. We used to do a show called like This Year in Fecal Matters, where it was a show about news stories throughout the year where people just, you'd read these news stories about how a woman would go into like a Tim Hortons and get into a fight with somebody and then like poop in her hand and throw it across the building. Like, who does that? But we would do shows, news stories like that. But now I'm not doing that stuff anymore. I'll do it on other podcasts, but on mine I'm not. And as I was telling you off the air earlier, the more seriously I take the show, the more it's becoming, and the more time it's taking and the more work it's taking to put, you know, more serious, interesting content out there. So, you know, it's just, as you guys will learn also in podcasting, you know, well, except for the one show, you guys got 100 episodes, you get to a point where it's like, how much more of this stuff can I cover and still keep being interested in these things? Because there's only so much out there, and then you got to start digging deeper and deeper through history and unusual guests and things like that. So that's where I'm at now. It's like, what more can I find? How can I keep this interesting for me and still keep it interesting for the people that are listening to the show? You know, and going down those rabbit holes, which is half the fun itself. You'll sit down in front of the computer, you'll look at something, and then the next thing you know, you're looking up how like Portuguese sailors were seeing haunted dogs on their boats that were being attacked by flying rats. And you're like, how come I never heard about this before? What's going on here? I got to do a show on this, you know? That's kind of the point where I'm at now.
That's how books are created, by the way, is you fall in the wrong rabbit hole, and the next thing is you've got that.
Yes, or you start doing drugs.
Well, that too.
Or both.
Sometimes both.
Sometimes both, yes.
It could be both.
Yeah, exactly. That's how we got Aleister Crowley.
I like really, really feel what you're saying there, because I think that Charlie's experience has been that if I say, oh, I'll take care of writing the history lesson for one, then he's like, great, I don't have to do a thing, because I'll wind up down some weird 45-minute long rabbit hole.
But that's half the fun.
But it is. That's a lot of the pleasure of it.
And then you're like, wow, I need to share this with other people because I didn't know about this. Maybe somebody else does it. And then you got people listening, scratching their heads going, wow, what the heck is this stuff? You know?
Yeah.
What Michael hasn't figured out yet is that that's very intentional on certain topics where I'm like, there's a lot of stuff here. You should take that one.
Yeah, hey, I'll grab that one. I'll pop out of the ground 500 yards from here on it. Like a lot of what we talk about is that same experience. I definitely, having grown up in rural Appalachia, I grew up in a place where I was told repeatedly the supernatural and the paranormal are real, and they're dangerous, and we never talk about them, and they are the worst term anything could have applied to, that could be applied to anything, which was they're unchristian. And so I like constantly had adults basically whispering in my ear, all this stuff is legit, but like never talk about it. And one of the ways to unravel the weird trauma of that kind of upbringing in a lot of ways is to joke around about it and normalize talking about it. And that's one of the things that Charlie and I work really hard to do, is to say, we don't think we have the secret answer. Like, we don't think that we know the truth. We have our experiences, and we have what other people say that they have experienced, but we're going to just talk about the topic and relax rather than like claim that we're the people who figured it all out.
We were just, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
We were just talking about this the other day about how the cultural impact of the satanic panic on people of a certain age is still felt today. Like, I remember being a kid, and you know, you have to look at it through the lens of what people were experiencing at the time. They thought they were doing good by their families, right? So I'm willing to forgive the fact that certain things that I really enjoyed were all of a sudden just taken away, and I was told that that's not okay anymore. You know, you grew up and everything's spooky, in my house at least. Everything's spooky and scary. It was kind of fun. And then all of a sudden it was like a switch flipped one day, and all of a sudden it wasn't fun anymore, and you weren't allowed to enjoy it.
I went through that with Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger. It was like, that is the devil. Don't play Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
That'll lead you to the dark side, which it actually kind of did. It got me further along into this stuff. So it succeeded.
What I was going to say was that then, in my household, shows like The X-Files came out and sort of renormalized things, and it became a family affair to watch The X-Files. And all of a sudden, like as the cultural fog that was the satanic panic sort of lifted on a larger scale, we experienced, at least in my household, that like, oh, you know, maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe things got a little out of control there for a minute.
Well, I mean, having grown up with, because I guess in the old one, you know, and crotchety one, you know, get off my lawn. Having grown up in the era of having been born in 69 and growing up through the 70s, where everything when you turned around on TNT was, you know, the book set from Time Life and Magic Mysteries and Glowing Pyramids that led to Scientology.
I have those.
And, you know, Leonard Nimoy, I was like, thank God Spock is telling us the reality about, you know, and so much of the In Search Of series was so much fun to watch. So I think one of the things that we do with this program is talking about story and storytelling, because everything, when you get down to it in paranormal, occult, all of this fundamentally boils down to the story. It boils down to the narrative. It boils down to the experience. And so I think that's one of those things, is a lot of the time is frequently there's really not a whole lot of something you're going to point to and say, here's the hard scientific evidence. This is the hard facts of this. We can do this kind of test. We can do this level of study. You know, if we go back and look at things like the Tesla and Edison wars are always one of those things that fascinated me. But late in life, both of them were actively working on spirit phones and communicating with the dead. These sorts of things. The story is what ultimately is important, the story and the experience. So from story and experience, let's grab one here, you know, from everybody from your shows. What's one that came from somebody else that still touched what you guys are doing? Who wants that one first?
I guess I'll go. Every once in a while, I haven't done one lately, but I do like to have shows where listeners will write me and say, hey, this is what's happened to me. And I'll do a show called Tell Me a Story, where I'll have them on and they'll tell various stories. We had one gentleman on the show, and this one still sticks in my head. It's him and his buddy, they lived out in the rural, I don't want to say countryside, but they lived like in a small city or what have you. And they were driving into town, and as they were looking up, they noticed a giant hovering potato over top of their city. And I was like, a potato? And they're like, yeah, it was a potato. It wasn't, it was a UFO, but it was a giant baked potato. And went into great detail describing it. And those are things that stick out to me because everybody has the stereotypical, we saw a disc, we saw this, we saw a triangle or what have you. It's the really strange, high strangeness that really cues out to me because it's almost like something's there poking at you saying, oh yeah, well, explain this to somebody, get somebody to believe this story. Like you might be able to tell a buddy, yeah, I was driving down the road, like what happened to me several years ago. You're driving down the road, and you see a small circular pattern of lights very slowly float over your car and go off the distance. I go, okay, you might be nuts, but I've heard paranormal. I've heard UFO stories before, what have you, and you get a little tease, oh, little green men, etc. But you can't exactly sit down and tell somebody in a setting, hey man, me and my buddy were driving down the road and we drove under a floating potato that was floating over top of our city. Because then it's like, all right, well, if it were a UFO, you'd get laughed at. If you tell somebody you saw a flying potato, how do you react to that? What do you do? It's like,
how high were you?
Yeah, exactly. That's the
was it
question.
Still wrapped in the foil?
No, it was not wrapped in the foil. I believe that was one of the questions that I asked him. Yeah, he went to big detail. And of course, I did tease him a little bit of, but because it was just such a strange story. And you hear stories like this. I was referencing someplace else on another podcast, I believe, where we were talking about a gentleman was sitting in his house and an alien had walked, stereotypical gray alien had walked through his living room, walked his refrigerator, grabbed a can of Dr. Pepper, opened it up, and walked out the door. And that's another one of those things where it's like, how do you tell somebody that? Okay, yes, I've had an experience with aliens or something like that. All right, you're a little nuts, but we've heard this before. There's something to that. You don't tell somebody that an alien walked into your house, grabbed a can of soda, and then walked out the door. Like how do you go about telling somebody like something like that? It's so fantastical and farcical that it's like, do you believe this guy because it's so nuts, or who makes up a story like that? I'm not going to sit around and come up with stories about carrots that jump out of my television set and start stealing my Xbox controllers away from me or what have you. Because
that's oddly specific.
Yes, exactly.
I'd like to explore that.
So is seeing a flying UFO, baked potato flying over top of your city.
Well, based on a conversation Friday night on something else, I may have an explanation for you about the flying potato.
Okay.
Yeah, we discussed the fact that potatoes really should be the symbol for the Illuminati because they've got all those all-seeing eyes. So,
thanks. You'll be here all week. Try the prime rib. It's great. Tip your waitresses. They're working hard for you.
All right, I got that one out. Sorry, had to work that one in.
But that's one of the main ones is when I hear stories like that when the guests come on the show and tell these really farcical, just I don't know, just nutty stories. Those are the ones where I kind of go, huh, either you're lying and you're a really good storyteller or something so genuinely bizarre happened to you. It's where I question, like, is this the trickster element where something is out there just poking back at people going, all right, you're interested in this stuff? Let's just see how far we can push you to a point where we're going to show you something that you can't possibly tell somebody. So now you have to deal with this. Have fun with that. And it just kind of sits back and puts its hand behind his and kind of chuckles at you,
Yeah, my personal life goal is to become a poltergeist to screw with people.
It's more of a death goal, frankly.
It's an end game there.
This should not be a shocker to you guys. This should not be a shocker. All right, who wants to go for another one?
I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to defer to Michael for
Sure.
our portion.
So, one thing that immediately jumps to mind, this is not the specific answer that I'm about to give you, but a more general comment, is that literally within minutes of telling people that we were going to make a show, we hadn't even made it yet, people started saying, oh, you've got to talk about whatever, and telling us weird stories that they had experienced, or telling us their favorite legends from South Carolina. A fraternity brother from college that I talked to probably once a year, literally within minutes had shown up on Facebook to tell me that we needed to talk about the South Carolina lizard man, which we had already planned to do. But that's the sort of thing that, like, everybody's got a story like this and they are desperate to share it or desperate to hear somebody else share their take on it. To be specific, though, we recorded an episode that at the moment that we're recording this is not yet out, but it will be possibly by the time you publish this. Anyway, we did an episode where we talked to Tally Johnson. He's a writer and ghost hunter and paranormal researcher in South Carolina. You know him, Jim. I know.
And he's been on Project Archivist as well. We did a show with Tally.
Mhm, yeah.
Oh, okay. And so we talked to Tally, and he told us some great stories. And one of the things that struck me in the course of it was he sort of declined to consider himself a quote unquote serious paranormal researcher. And there are so many people who do that sort of work, and they don't think that other people will take them seriously, or they don't think that their experiences are big enough or flashy enough or have a big enough effects budget or whatever to be worth, quote unquote, sharing. And so we're going to do a series of special episodes called Arcane Carolinas Case Files, where we get paranormal research groups from the Carolinas to come on, talk to us about what it is they do, why they're into this, tell us some stories, and like how people can contact them, so that if they're some obscure group of friends from a little town in South Carolina and they don't think of themselves as being, the monster hunters or whatever, but they do this because they're really dedicated and they really enjoy it, then maybe somebody else in that same town will hear this and get to contact them, and they can go investigate something. And it came from Tally saying, I don't really think of myself as a serious researcher, but if anybody calls me up and says, let's go hunting ghosts, okay, we'll get in the car. And I just thought, there's so many people out there like that. And so that's an example of somebody told us something that immediately stuck with us. As that's a kind of story that a lot of people will connect with, and a lot of people have.
Say for us, one of the things is that any type of story we get that we know somebody or one of us has experienced it, it's always so nice to just have the confirmation of a person, a reliable source, because you can read all the different websites and books that you want to. But when you actually have personal experiences or know somebody personally who has those personal experiences and they tell those stories to you, it adds to the authenticity, that's not the word, is it? But it just adds to the story, and it just makes you want to learn more. And anything that triggers one of our listeners or us even to just dig a little deeper. And that's why we're unearthing. You just dig a little deeper into the topics and learn as much as you can about them, because the more you know about things, the less scary they are. And
I know we had an episode we did that one of our listeners from Australia asked us to cover the Min lights because she had witnessed them and wanted to know more about them, and being able to dig into that for her, where she could just listen to us and get the information without having to take time out to do it, and see that other people have seen it too. Well, that was probably one of my favorite episodes that a listener wanted us to do, just because they wanted to know more about it.
So, kind of the flip side of that, when you do a lot of interviews, because I will openly say that generally, having been raised as a good little Catholic boy in the South, which makes me a unicorn to start with. So having been raised not far from where the lizard man happened, we went in high school, and then in college, we actually went lizard man hunting a couple of times. I grew up not far from there. We had fun with that. At some point, I have a lizard man versus Bigfoot story that's going to maybe be published, even though it sort of blew past that one. Charlie Kaufman, that Michael, is the one that accidentally started the whole lizard man international post about lizard man sightings being seen, and Japan picked that up because it came from the emergency response site. So yeah, you can start an international incident pretty quickly if you tell a good story.
Yep.
So
Lizard Man's real. That's not a story.
Well, and since I'm currently hiding up here in the mountain bunker up here in the mountains of North Carolina, I also see a lot of people are now at least incorporating myth and folklore a way I would say you probably would have seen 200 years ago. I mean, just up the road here, somebody's done a Bigfoot cutout that's about 8 feet tall that's peeking out from behind a tree. That's a hell of a thing. The first time you see it is just the big form peeking back out you around the tree is the giant cutout. People are having a little more fun and embracing things that typically we would have regarded as tradition and folklore even 100, 150 years ago. Michael, like you're saying, where you came and grew up here, not that far from where I'm at up here in the mountains, certain things are much more incorporated into the folklore and the spirituality of where you're at versus if you're sitting in Charlotte, you're sitting in Detroit. That's a whole different kind of what are you going to get into, the ghost hunts, the things like that happen. So when you get somebody that starts feeding you a story and you look at them and you're like, just like what Ro was talking about, when somebody's feeding you something, when your BS detector goes off, what's that like? And how do you look at that? Is it because somebody's story about, alien came in, held up a hand, look, I'm having a day, I'm just getting a drink and I'm leaving you alone, we're all good. If somebody tells you a story like that, is it because that's what they saw, or is that because that's how best they can interpret it? You talk about the trickster modality. Is really what we're exploring here what we're actually seeing and experiencing? Is it what people perceive because that's the best thing that they have in their toolkit to understand and comprehend? Or is it because, in some cases, they have no idea what's going on and it's just plug in a hole, or they just want to be heard, whether it's true or not?
So you want to go first? I guess I will. It's hard to say. I guess the answer to the question is all of the above, because we really don't, for all that we know and for all that we check into, we still don't understand what any of this stuff really is. Because if we did, we wouldn't be talking about it. So like you see this happen in the UFO community. You also see it kind of in the Bigfoot community and stuff. For the UFO community, you have the debate of, is something that we're seeing interfering with our consciousness, or are these nuts and bolts craft? In the paranormal world, it's with the Bigfoot world, is, well, is Bigfoot an interdimensional creature? Is it a flesh and blood creature? And people go back and forth and debate on all of this stuff. And I'm kind of the guy that sits back and says, well, what if it's both? What if what we're seeing, like if we're seeing UFOs, the argument is, well, is this nuts and bolts, or is this something arguing or coming in and messing with our subconscious or our perception of reality? It could very well be both. It could be, yes, this right here is a nuts and bolts craft. That is not a nuts and bolts craft, but because of our way of perception and perceiving things and the way that our world exists, it's like looking at a four-dimensional creature when you can only perceive 3 dimensions. It's hard to put a pin onto any one thing when you don't entirely understand what it is, which is why when people come and listen to these shows, or when you research, or when you're doing this stuff, I tell everybody, go out and learn all of the things. It's the same thing when I'm talking to people about, because I study magic and stuff, and people will come up, well, should I become a practitioner of Wicca? Should I follow Crowley? Should I go Enochian? And I'm like, learn it all. Find your own path and come to your own interpretations, which is part of the reason why I think we all do podcasting. We're all trying to find these answers for ourselves and come up with our own conclusions. I don't think there's anything one out there that, it's like somebody said earlier, I don't think there is a key answer to all of this. It's when we're not going to find a key answer at any point to all of this. It's just what works for us and how we wish to perceive it and what brings us to it and what brings, what our interests and stuff lie into. But I don't think that there's any one thing where you can put a pin on it and say, it is this, it is that, it is all of these different things, because all of this stuff is happening outside of our normal scope of perception. So we just have to, it's like the blind man walking up and feeling an elephant. It's one person will tell you, well, it's this when they feel the leg, and some also feel the tail. What's this? And someone will feel the trunk and tell you, well, it's this. It's not. It's an elephant, but we can only perceive a certain part of it depending on where we grasp. I think I'm talking in circles here. Maybe not. But so to in my opinion, to look at something and say, well, it is definitely this. That's kind of dangerous, because it kind of shuts down your perception, and it kind of, once you lock into a belief about something, getting out of that belief is very, very hard. So it's important to stay open and try to look at all of this stuff as a whole and get what you can, as much as you can, from wherever you can. So that's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I like to look at things as it's real to the person who experienced it. It's real. To them, it's real. So whether it's the way that they perceived it, or if they're just making it up, they've eventually made it real enough in their head to come up with some elaborate story. And who are we to say that they're lying or they're not telling the truth? Because we don't know. You know, I've seen an apparition, but I still doubt that I saw an apparition. You know, it's one of those things that I don't even believe my own accounts of things. So how can I judge somebody else on their belief of what they've seen? So usually when we have any kind of story, we'll sit and we'll try to discuss, you know, well, what could it have been? Try to find try to find other options for what could have happened, and see if that fits into what was actually seen. But we never say that you didn't see that, you didn't hear that. We just try to just look at all the options on the table and then make judgments from that. And we don't, you know, we've never on our episode said that this is the facts and this is what it is. It's always, well, we presented all the options to our listeners. You guys decide what it is and go from there.
There's no serious we don't objectify anything, whether the topic is super deep, super dark, or even high in question. We all gain our own opinions, but we never force our opinions on anybody. Because when you start talking about the paranormal, there's no reason to try and convince somebody who's not open to the energy already. So it's a situation of giving all sides of the story, you know.
I would say it's also just being a nice person. Let the person tell their story, right? Like,
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's insisting on one truth and being the only person who has it is, if anybody does that, they're just like, they're falling into the trap of dogma.
it's a business model.
It is a business model, and a very successful one, it turns out. It's just not one that I can feel very good participating in. But, you know, people who want the dogmatic answer, I think, have missed the point of a lot of the joy in these topics, which is the joy of finding the questions. You know, I just said to Charlie, you know, like, I don't want answers. I want all the questions. And with the topics that we've talked about, a lot of times we've said explicitly, like, we did an episode about the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina. And in that, we discussed a lot of the suggested explanations that other people have come up with, and then sort of chose to reject all of them in favor of, let's keep it mysterious.
It's not nitrous gas.
It's not nitrous gas.
It's not a fish concert on the side of a mountain where people are huffing balloons.
No, it is not, because I've actually seen them. Again, that's about 45 minutes where I'm at. I've gone over there. It's about the time of year when you can see them.
Yeah. You know, I feel like a lot of it is just the simple compassion of trusting that people are going to share. When people share a story, what they end up sharing is what is important to them about that story and about that experience. And maybe they're framing it in the context of what they already believe, and maybe they're not. I don't know. I'm not going to claim to have the special insight into the mind of a person telling a story to know. We have had experiences where we have talked to people and facts as they recounted them did not line up across the length of the same story. But again, memory is a tricky thing. And,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not here to interrogate people in order to establish the official record. I think that even the time that I came back from the beach and told you about seeing a UFO, Charlie, I think what I started the story with was, everything I'm about to describe, I refuse to attach or assign a truth value to. And that's because I present as the gay Vulcan in our friendship. But that's, you know, ultimately it was really important to me to establish up front. I'm not trying to say that, like, my experience now defines the genre. I'm saying that this is what I experienced. It's an experience, not an explanation.
And in my desire to find more questions and not necessarily believe that there are answers available, fell into my role of Jay of the Jay and Silent Bob duo, and super excitedly jumped up and down. Was like, "Whoa, tell me more!" So yeah, I do recall that conversation.
Yeah.
So then as you guys are looking for the genuine experience, the genuine story, because I think that's largely what we're looking for here is not answers. It's, can you progress the narrative that might give the next step? Because I think one of the things everybody's talked about thus far is the idea that there's not an easy end solution. At the end of this, 2 + 2 is going to be 4. Aliens are going to land at the White House, walk out the door and say, by the way, here's the answer to ghosts. If you're looking at that entire narrative, again, it's the journey to get there. It's a storyteller's journey, and it's looking at the story. So from that perspective, what does it mean for you then when you see stuff that is blatantly hoaxed, openly hoaxed, coming out, and then people still buy the story? What does that mean for you?
For me, that's taking advantage of people. That's the opposite of being a nice person and letting someone share their experience. That's predatory, and I do have an issue with that.
Agreed. It's just one of those things that anytime you hear one of the hoax stories or anything like that, you're taking time away from the people who are actually putting lots of time and effort free of charge into trying to discover what's going on, and then you're just going to throw this out there. And how many of those people wasted their time on your hoax? You're just wasting time, and it's not a nice person.
That thing that I mentioned about dogma, usually dogma is offered in pursuit of an agenda. And anybody who shows up with a hoax story almost always sort of drenches it in, and this thus proves X or Y or Z. And anybody who says this thus proves, they've got an agenda, and I'm automatically distrustful of that.
Yeah.
And, hoaxes are perpetrated as a way to manipulate people and to get something out of them. And it's not kind, and it's not any better than selling them a bridge that doesn't exist or whatever. It's a form of cruelty.
You see, if I'm going to cover it, it's going to be along the lines of, okay, this is a hoax. It's obviously a hoax, but if we're going to do this, let's talk about, why did you hoax this? How did you hoax this? What happened when you hoaxed this? What was the repercussions of doing this? And I would be doing that purely based on the grounds of trying to educate other people. Like, it's frustrating for me because I believe a lot of this stuff is hoaxed. But I do believe that there's nuggets and kernels of truth. And I do believe that things are going on that we can't explain, or else I wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. But by the same token, it's like, all right, well, if somebody's going to go through the effort of hoaxing this and stuff, then let's shine a light on that so that other people that are investigating this stuff can go, oh, that's how they did it. That's why they did it. So to be able to educate people, this is how you spot a hoax. This is what's going on here. So when you see something like this, question that, make sure your ducks are in a row. And not so much for the glorification of the person hoaxing it, just as a way of, to show other people, this is what's going on. This is what you need to look out for. Hoaxes do happen, and it's, I don't want people believing in things that are obviously hoax. Like, we've all seen it where something will pop up on Facebook and it'll keep making the rounds, but because we're all podcasters and we've done the research and we see this stuff, it's kind of frustrating to see that happen, where it's like, no, this isn't real. Don't pay attention to it. This is why it's fake. But there are things out there that are cool to still go out and check into. Plus, by doing that stuff, it gives the skeptics that are the snarky jerks more fuel for their fire. They can go, oh no, all this stuff is fake. Here's a great example right here of how this is fake. And it's like, well, just because that's fake doesn't mean that everything else is fake. That right there, and that right there, and that right there. Yes, those are fakes. I get it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be going out looking at this other stuff. So when the big fake things come up that happen, it's important to shine a light on them to show people, hey, yes, this is fake and this is why, but don't let this discourage you. Don't let this pour water on your fire. Keep going and keep investigating. Just be aware of what's actually going on. Like, we saw this happen this last week with the, and I know everybody saw it, the blimp that was on the side of the freeway. Everybody stopped and looked at it and was like, what is that? It's a UFO or whatever. Well, it turned out it's a blimp. So, but in the meantime, there was that big fervor of, look, UFOs are real. Here's a UFO on the side of the road and stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's a blimp. Yeah, okay, we get it. But there's still other things out there you can keep going for. Don't let this discourage you.
Joseph Ryan of the Duke Parapsychology Research Institute spent his entire career, very well-funded career in academia, doing that exact thing, outing hoaxes while still pursuing the truth behind what he labeled as ESP. It's a fascinating read. And I back what you just said 100%. And there's, historical precedent for people sharing that attitude.
Yeah, hoaxes are important. Even though it's a hoax and it kind of rains on our parade, it's important to not just shove that stuff aside and keep on going. It's important to acknowledge it and pull it out to the light and say, yes, this was a hoax. We need to acknowledge this, but we also need to keep going and moving on, so we know what to look forward, look out for in the future. Just be smart about what you're doing, because it adds intelligence to what you're doing. It adds credence to what you're investigating and what you're looking into. Whereas because you don't want to be one of the sheeple, you don't want to be something that just looks at that and goes on and on and on, because that's how you get things like Alex Jones and things like that happen.
Yeah, right.
We're going to keep it PG-13. I won't say what I said, but in a recent episode that's about to come out, I uncorked a bottle of too much truth on a particular story. So yes, I agree.
And I think it's important also to ask yourself, regardless of whether I think people are generally better at detecting dishonesty than they give themselves credit for being. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they don't give themselves that credit means that they second guess themselves out of recognizing dishonesty when they see it. But also, I think an important thing to ask yourself is the person telling the story selling you something? Mm-hmm. We've talked in the past about people who report things, whatever their experience is that they're describing. If they refuse to identify themselves, but they tell a consistent story across multiple interviews or recollections or whatever. We talked about a guy who saw a Bigfoot and got interviewed by some big newspapers and would never let his name be used, did not want to be identified. He had no interest in profiting from this, but he told a consistent story across several venues. And that tells you, okay, he's either practiced it a lot, or he's recollecting something that really happened to him, and B, he's not trying to get rich off of it. He's not saying there's a family of Bigfoots that live in my backyard, sign up for my webinar and I'll tell you more. Mm-hmm. He's just,
I've got one in a freezer.
I remember that.
In a freezer.
Yep.
I remember that. Yeah.
You see a lot of that in the UFO and Bigfoot communities, where people, they'll tell a story, and then as time goes on, that story becomes embellished more and more and more. And they have to do that to keep themselves relevant in that field of study, so they can keep going and doing the seminars. Because once somebody's heard your story, I've already heard that story. Well, now the story has to change and things have to evolve to keep that interest there, to keep selling that book, to keep doing the show appearances, to keep doing the presentations and stuff like that. So it's very much like you said, is this person selling anything? Why are they telling this story? Are there consistencies in the story? How long have they been telling this story for, et cetera, and so on? And that's part of what makes the UFO and the cryptozoology field so murky and so hard to get into. Because you've got, like in the UFO field, you've got the people that have the gray alien agenda, and you see all that divisiveness in that world. And if you're somebody coming into it, you've had an experience, and I've said this before, say you have a UFO experience. Well, you can't tell a lot of people because you don't want to get laughed at. So you go to one of these UFO conferences, and then there's people that are like, yes, I believe you, and this is what happened to you. Buy my book. And then you get locked into that, oh, well, I saw a UFO, therefore grays must be real, and I must be abducted, and I must have an implant in me, and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like getting involved with a cult. Same thing with the cryptozoology community. You have a Bigfoot experience and you go to a Bigfoot seminar. You can't tell your friends. So you go on one of these seminars or whatever, you get involved in that community. Oh, here are people that believe me and want to listen to me, and also will coddle me along and keep me going. So, you see these people that tell these stories, and it's like, are you for real? Like, are you just giving me a line of garbage here to get me to buy your books and stuff? And it's very easy to fall into that trap. Again, this is why exposing hoaxes is so important, to say, watch out for this, stay away from this, keep investigating, but pay attention that this stuff happens.
Yep.
So from you guys' viewpoint, if we now look at, because all of you are coming at this from a passion standpoint. So, and we've touched on this a little bit, but what if you look at the commercial side of this industry? Because it has definitively become an industry because of the coast to coast and all the rest of that sort of thing. And we've seen people that have built very large businesses around this. I'm never going to fault somebody for creating a business around a passion or anything along those lines. But do you think that this is also, if we look at something like TTSA, and AJ, I'm sorry, we're going to pick on TTSA. But if you're looking at things like this that are definitively, I mean, TTSA is a media company. Let's be honest for what it is. If we see that people are doing stuff like this that are or aren't necessarily being as honest about what they're doing and what they're diving into, you know, how do you think that hits up against what you're doing and the people that you attract to you, your shows, your programming, versus the stuff that's more commercial that you look at and you go, I can't believe somebody just bought that crap?
You think Tom DeLonge's a patsy?
My
Useful
personal
idiot.
answer is yes, but
I think he's a useful idiot. I would
Useful
agree
idiot.
with. I do think he's a believer. When we talk about TTSA, I think it's worth saying that I think I will be a fervent Tom DeLonge defender here. I think Tom DeLonge really believes.
Mhm. I do as well.
I'm not disputing that, but again, for what they've built a company around it, I don't think it's 100% genuine about what they're doing.
No, I'd agree with that.
Nobody else wants to pick on him.
I like Tom DeLonge. You can make fun of him all you want. I know he's ridiculous. Like, it's fine.
I'm actually not.
saying.
Let me add this one piece. I'm actually not picking on him because I give him a lot of credit because he created a company and a foundation to come and try and address an issue, because I believe he does believe what he says.
Mm-hmm.
The other question is, when all the rest of the people that you have running your company are intelligence agents, former intelligence agents.
Well,
I also don't believe he wrote any of those books. I think he might have been like, yeah, this is cool, I approve it, and like checked a box.
Well, A.J. Hartley writes the fiction ones.
Doesn't he get like a co-author credit or something?
Yeah, he gets co-author credit, and I hate getting old and senile. Writes the nonfiction. He gets a co-author credit.
Okay.
But it's the co-author credit. He's not writing the books.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't fault
As a
him.
kid,
I don't fault him a company for creating something where they can generate revenues and create awareness and publicity and the rest of this. I'll
agree with you that he's getting played by those people. I like the guy. He's a knuckle. I grew up riding skateboards and listening to his first band, so kind of a fan. And when he launched that, I was like, this is ridiculous. So I guess that's my response to your question, right? Like, it all depends on who's behind the company. If I believe that there's a useful idiot that's being taken advantage of, I won't necessarily hate the effort if it comes from a good place. I have never given them $1. Any TTSA stuff, never given them $1, because you can kind of see through it. But I don't hate them. I guess I vote with my wallet, I guess, is how I handle those companies.
I have a personal pet peeve with an individual that owns a museum in Las Vegas, who I think of him as the paranormal's answer to a frat boy, who just goes out and buys all of this stuff and puts it on display in a museum without any real respect. I don't know, maybe you guys from over on Unearthing will agree with me because you're more along those lines. This is a guy that comes along and just buys all this stuff and puts it on display in a museum as like a sideshow attraction kind of thing without really paying any respect to where it came from or what it is and the stories that affected those people's lives. People like that annoy me when you get, they do these paranormal shows and stuff, and then they just go out and like kind of capitalize on what they find. And at that point, it's like, you're cheapening. It feels like they're cheapening it. I don't know. How do you guys over there feel about that particular? You know who I'm talking about? I'll refer to him as Bilbo.
we refer to him as the Ghost Bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy that comes along and gets this stuff and puts it on display. It's like, yeah, dude, come on down and check out my awesome paranormal museum. There's a demon box in here, stuff like that. It's like, come on, man. These are things that affected people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Some of these things have a tragic past, and you have to kind of respect the history of whatever object it is. And yeah, I cannot stand him anyway. And as soon as you started talking, I was like, I know who he's talking about.
Yes.
God.
Yes. He is the paranormal frat boy. He's
Yes.
the dude that sits around like drinking all the beers like, dude, let's go out and let's go fight a demon, and I'm going to make a museum, and and there's a crowd of those kind of people that it's like, what, I really don't want to deal with those people, but it breeds that, which goes back to, that would be the kind of person that would go out. He doesn't care if it's a hoax or not. It's just, is it going to draw people in? Is it going to draw people into this kind of stuff?
Look at where he did it.
Exactly. It's the perfect place for it.
I think context really, really matters when you're evaluating people's attempts to commercialize this type of stuff. And again, I said vote with your wallet. You don't have to give them any money. Nobody has to give them any money. Michael and I are really hard on reality TV people.
Excellent. As
that really strikes a nerve that is lined up with exactly what you guys are saying.
Anybody who's looking to get a TV show on the Travel Channel or whatever, as we're the cool, exciting next wave of ghost hunters with cameras and a need to fill 20 minutes of content twice a week. I have very little respect for that. I have a lot of respect for people who are like, hey, this is fun and I want everybody to be able to talk about it. But I don't have a lot of respect for people who use that as the way to draw me in so that they can stick their hand in my pocket.
Yeah. When it comes to the paranormal shows, some of the original ones that came out, they were more realistic to where they would have cases that nothing happened. And if you've ever been on a paranormal investigation, that's what you're going to get most of the time is nothing.
And then viewers started dropping off. That was why then it was like, oh, we got to jazz this up in some way, shape, or form. And at that, because like you say, real ghost hunting, real investigating is often very boring. It's often just walking around with flashlights, and many, many, many times nothing happens. I had to laugh. There was that show on, it was investigating UFOs. And it was always like, and if you'd have been here that night underneath this tree, you would have saw a light here. And it's like, I get what you're doing, but this really isn't a good format for a television show because, you're going on investigating a UFO that happened however long ago. There's nothing here you're going to see right now unless you're just telling a story. So, it's kind of boring. But with these shows, they have to keep doing things to spice them up. And at that point, it's like, okay, is this fake? I know a guy, John Tenney, he was on a paranormal show. He's local for me. And he was telling me about how they came out and told him, okay, we want you to go inside that house and tell them that their house is absolutely haunted by a demon or something like that. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's what this is. I think there's a person in this house that's having some kind of issues in their life or so forth. This isn't something that they need a demonologist in here for. They need a psychiatrist or a self-care or something like that. No. You need you to go in there and tell them that. And we're going to make this episode more of what it is. And when you hear these stories, you're like, nah, this is about getting people to watch. And it's dangerous because these people will watch these shows and go, oh, this is what ghost hunting is. This is what this stuff is. And then like you said earlier, like, okay, everybody wants to go out and get their camera and have their 20 minutes of fame. Fortunately, that stuff doesn't last very long. Once people get into it and they see what this actually is, it's kind of like, meh. The frustrating part is that because of these shows like Ghost Hunters and the things that these shows do, it propagates this artificial, it makes the paranormal something that it isn't. And it makes it more spooky than it doesn't need to be more spooky. It's already weird as it is. It doesn't need to have this stuff done to it, but it fosters this false impression, and it makes more paranormal bros and frat boys and things like that. Everybody wants to be the next paranormal star or some kind of shape or another. And it's like, all right, go do your thing. It gets frustrating when you see it. So I can't watch it anymore. I'm like the other guys here. It's like, I can't watch any of this stuff after a while. It's like, yeah, I've seen all this 100 times. I'd rather go out and do the work myself.
Well, there's a difference between like emphasizing the enjoyment of the topic and having fun with it and ultimately making the topic about oneself. And people like that are ultimately making the story about them.
So someone that does not make it about themselves and does put the work in, but also has a commercial product, like somebody like Leslie Keene in her UFO book, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, which is sort of considered a classic, I guess you would say, in that genre of paranormal topics, UFOs. Leslie Keene was very dry about it. Like, here are the facts. Here are the interviews. This is what people said. Here are the photographs that they provided. I have a lot of respect for that sort of monetization of topics, and I will absolutely support that research.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I don't think monetization is a sin. If you're writing books, if you're producing content that's quality and exploring it, I don't see any problem with getting paid for that. It costs money to produce.
Yeah.
It costs money to do all of these things.
As a novelist, I love it when people pay money for books.
Well, yeah.
But I hope that they'll pay money for good books.
Shout out to our Patreon backers. We'll keep doing cool stuff if you give us money.
Yeah, you know.
So I kind of want to hit one last thing here as we're getting ready to wrap up. And it's all about the community you guys are building, on each of your different platforms. So, if you're looking at, like the Project Archivist Facebook group, if you're looking at how people can reach out to you now globally from all over the world and come to you with a story, how important are your communities to you in terms of what you've been able to build as a community with the show?
We can go ahead and start. We do Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But what I think is the most valuable thing we have is our Facebook group, where we actually get to interact directly with our listeners and tell stories and communicate. And we get episode ideas, because I'm sure all of you have had those moments when you're like, we need to do an episode. My mind is blank. I can't think of anything. And so we turn to our listeners and we say, hey, what do you guys want to hear about? And we get ideas from them. We've started something. We do a haunted road trip is what we call it. And we look at our demographic of our listeners. And we go to whatever area is listening to us most at that time. And we research that city or that state that they're in and find some of the most haunted sites in that area that they can go visit. We try to do public areas that they can actually go to, so that then maybe our listeners can listen to the episode and be intrigued and want to go check it out. The interaction with the listeners is invaluable when it comes to the Facebook group, because they give us so many ideas and they kind of keep us going. Yeah. The demographics show people listen to our podcast, but we don't ever see those people that listen to our podcast. So it's nice to be able to talk with them on the social media and, put names to stories and just make it so we're not talking to just mics. We can see that there are people who are listening to us.
Okay, we even have listeners who have made like little snippets of like cut together pieces of our banter, or when someone would say something stupid, they cut it and make a 2-minute audio file of it and send it to us. And it cracks us up every time we get something like that. And it's cool that we have, there's people who are willing to do that and they enjoy what we do, and just being able to communicate with them. And sometimes, we're just goofing around with them and, we're making jokes and sharing. We share a lot of memes in our Facebook group, but overall, just the communication back is a lot of fun to deal with.
And then even on top of that, just one more thing, guys. Being able to be a laugh, a joke, a smile in our listeners, like just aura in general, is a big thumbs up. Whether we see it, whether we don't. Generally, if one of us laugh, the joke had to be funny. It's not fake laughter, boys. But honestly, it's a situation of, putting the information out there, getting it back from our listeners, and being able, and like Amy said, being able to put a face, a name, and everything else to it. It just, it sure as hell brightens my day. So.
We're kind of building our community from the ground up right now, because we are so new compared to the other two shows that are on here. And the way we're trying to do it is through the approach Michael mentioned, which is the Arcane Carolinas case files, where we have reached out to a number of what we believe to be reputable paranormal investigators. We hope they're reputable.
Fingers crossed.
We hope they're not Bilbos. So that we can sort of, build this community of like-minded people that want to explore the ideas that we cover, while simultaneously doing the grassroots word of mouth thing.
And also the fact that by nature we have scoped ourselves to a specific geography.
Yes.
I think that means that those communities are literally important to us, because those are the places, the geographical communities are the places we're talking about. But also B, it means that people who are interested in Arcane Carolinas tend to have some sort of connection to Carolinas, and it's something where they want to hear about places that they recognize from their lives, and that tie to geography has turned out to be really strong for a lot of people.
Yeah. What's weird is that locally we've we scoped it very narrow to the point where locally I ran into with my wife and my kid. We were out getting some food the other day, carry out 6 feet apart, totally safe, and bumped into some people that she knows through her work that were like, oh, hey, we really enjoyed it. We shared it with our kid. So that's really cool, right? Because that means that, like, okay, well, this kid might tell his friends, because that's what kids do. And it feels very grassroots the way we're doing it with the narrow scope. And sort of the laser focus, but it also means that we need to be aware that we can't say a lot of bad words because children listen.
Yeah, our first reaction was, oh, great, now we can't cuss.
Yeah.
Been there.
We need to change our approach. Edit that one episode that hasn't been posted yet.
I guess that leaves me. My community has always been everything to me from day one. Fortunately, when I got started, since I was involved in different shows and hanging out in different chat rooms and other shows, a lot of people already knew who I was. So when I hit the ground, I kind of hit the ground running with a bunch of people that were waiting for me to get the show up and running. And a lot of those people are still there. But community to me is everything. Because I've had a listener that was over in New Zealand, and he sent me this message once. He's like, hey, I just want to let you know that even though you've got this podcast that covers silly and strange and odd things, I was going through chemotherapy because I had cancer, and I would listen to your show every week while I was at chemotherapy, and your show got me through cancer. Or someone will say, hey, I was going through a rough time in my life, and this episode that you did on this topic, made me reevaluate my life, and I'm still here today because of your show. And when you're doing these things, you don't really think about, if I record this show on a near-death experience, how is this going to affect my listeners or like that? You're just doing a show on near-death experiences because you're interested in all that stuff. And then when you get the feedback, about how the things that you've done, how they affect people, it sometimes it's overwhelming in a little bit. Sometimes it's kind of a tear-jerking thing, because like none of us, I don't think any of us ever sit down and say, we're going to record this episode with the intent of trying to change somebody's lives or do this or get somebody through whatever. We just do what we do because we're interested in it. So when you hear back from your community and you get that feedback loop going, it's a great feeling. And plus, like, I never try to see myself as a rock star. I never try to put myself out there as I'm not trying to be a Bilbo. I just want to do a show that covers really cool, interesting topics that are interesting to me, and hopefully other people will find those topics interesting. And then when you go out there and you see the people that are listening to your show, and you find that they're interested into it, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I found a place where I belong. So when somebody says, hey, I want to meet you and hang out with you, I want to talk to you, I always make it a point to be the normal guy, as normal as I possibly can, because this maybe has happened with you guys, maybe not. When somebody meets you, like, oh my God, I listen to every episode, I'm such a big fan, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool, man. So now let's talk for a little bit, tell me about your kids or whatever. Then after a little while, people are like, wow, you're just a normal guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am. But, I really appreciate you listening to me. It really matters a lot that you're here, that you went through the effort to meet me, to talk to me, and to tell me about how my show affected your life or what my show means to you. It's kind of it's a warm feeling to have that. And by having these communities and stuff and engaging with people, it's very important as a podcaster to engage with the people that are listening to you, and don't be a pen 15. Don't be a jerk about it, because these people are here for you, and in some way you're also there for them. But also, it's nice to be able to hear from people saying, hey, can you cover this, or can you cover that? Or I really enjoyed the way that you talked about this. We did an interview with Stanton Friedman, and we didn't cover very much about UFOs or anything at all. We were very interested in like his nuclear physicists and all this stuff that he did. And we did a whole episode of all these things that got him to where he was, thinking about why he got into UFOs. And for him, it was a weird interview, because like when you do interviews, you can have guests on that get into cookie cutter mode where they give the same answers out all the time, and they do the circuit. So when we did that show, a lot of people were like, that was really cool. That was a side of that guy that I'd never heard of before. And I think he kind of enjoyed it too, because it got him into a fresh realm of being able to discuss things that he hadn't talked about before. but to get that feedback from people of, hey, I like what you're doing, you're going in a different, nice, cool direction, you know, it's kind of it's like a reverberation chamber. Just things just bounce back and forth off of each other. Like you guys, the shows that you guys do, you guys are you're like my bread and butter, because I don't know anything about Arcane Carolinas and I don't know anything about what's going on in Oklahoma. So you are people that I would bug and say, hey, why don't you come on my show and tell me about your show and the things that are going on in your area? Because A, you know more about it than I do. B, you've got a new podcast, you're trying to get new listeners. And C, this is what you do. So I want to hear about what you're doing, and it fills content. It's less work that I have to do. I can be lazy and be like, you know, I don't need to research any of this stuff because these people research all this. Come on my show and talk about it. And then, you know, maybe it'll get you guys some listeners and things like that. And then the communities kind of meld into one another. You'll have people from your community that might come over and check out my show, and my people will come over and check out your show, and the communities feed off of one another.
Well, it was definitely a part of the process of us creating this show, of saying, like, we're in a time when people need more things to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
People need things that they can enjoy, and not just as distractions, but as ways to, like, it is very easy to, like, live a very responsible, being a good adult person life right now, and thus for life to become very monotonous because you're home all the time, like, you're not out doing whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you're trying to practice safety in a time when that is required, of just being a decent person. And so, like, people need something to look forward to and feel like time is advancing and that there is a future out there that involves fun things still. And, you know, I'm not claiming that we're, you know, like, descending from on high with the ability to, like, do that for people, but we can be a part of it, and there may be people out there who really get that from it. And I felt like as soon as we launched the show, the fact that we got a huge response from people being very enthusiastic about having a new way to talk about things like this told me that, you know, I was right, that people do welcome that, like, 15 minutes of having something awesome to think about in the middle of a circumstance where it is possible to spend the entire day thinking about things that are solely the opposite of awesome.
With that, and being part of a different community too, outside of where their everyday lives is. You know, they can go to our group's Facebook page and interact with us. And then, like, my Facebook page, probably the same with you guys. You have listeners that they know each other and they become friends with one another, and it becomes its own family unto itself. You know, and you can just kind of sit back and watch that happen and be like, wow, you know, and your listeners become friends, and they in turn become a kind of a family of their own, you know, and having people listening to shows and becoming involved with that, people want some kind of community outside of their normal lives, the day-to-day bustle of raising kids and paying bills and doing, you know, being mined on social media and so forth, you know, to be able to have what we do as an escape for people. You know, and it's important. That's why I think it's important that we do what we do, and we do it right, and we do it with respect and everything. So, you know, as long as what we're doing is different and we're not being Bilbos, you know, that's important to me as well.
That's going to be like the new slur, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's the Bilbo.
Don't be a Bilbo.
Don't be a Bilbo.
That's how we wind up creating a giant meme. So, so our friends in Oklahoma, I know you guys have got something to say.
What I was going to say is, anyways, what I was going to say is, at least for me, understanding what we mean to other people and what other podcasters, you gentlemen in general as well, mean to people. We, like, whatever we're covering or whatever podcast we're presenting, for me, it allows people to leave the normalcy of their life for just a moment, whether it be an hour or 2 hours, and listen to the deep concepts or deep facts or even deep ideas of what the particular subject is. You know, I mean, I know for me, you guys probably don't know this, but I know for me, I'm not winking at you gentlemen right now. I'm currently only have one eye. I lost that last year due to cancer. And one thing I can say is, either listening to our podcast, because I do that a lot because it's a hoot and holler, or going off and just finding a random podcast to listen to. It allowed myself to take my situation and kind of put it on a higher ground, or leave it alone for a second, and to kind of just put my mind and wrap myself around a new idea or a new concept. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way to connect with people from different backgrounds, different people who have different ideas, and allow everybody to come together and kind of just show, what their ideas about the concept or the subject. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that we all do.
We talked a lot about community and what we hope that the podcast does for people, but you just made a really good point that this is a form of self-care for us also.
Very much so.
We're all in the pandemic. We're all in our life circumstances, whatever they may be. This should be fun.
It is fun.
Right. Right?
Yeah.
Like this should be fun. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that's an awesome point. Thank you.
Well, and the fact that we've all been sitting here for an hour and 20 minutes talking about some arcane topics, but able to have fun with it and laugh about it and recognize it for what it is. But there's a lot of seriousness to it. And I mean, I think that's the key to this is community at the end of the day. Well, I appreciate you guys spending all this time with us. I want everybody just let everybody know where we can find your shows and anything else you want to push. So Michael, I'll let you and Charlie go first.
You can find Arcane Carolinas in all the expected our podcast apps and on Spotify. And our website is www.arcanecarolinas.com. Go Charlie.
You want a free sticker? Send us an email, arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. I will drop it in the mail to you the day I get your email. Yeah.
And I was going to say, I keep cutting you out and stepping on you. I was going to say, Michael's got to push books too. I mean, there's michaelgwilliams.com.
Finish up, Charlie.
We have social media accounts. Everything is at arcanecarolinas.com is sort of our web portal. If you go there, there's links to everything. The link to, LinkedIn. I hate LinkedIn. We're not on LinkedIn. The Instagram.
You should. Oh,
the Instagram, the Facebook, the Twitter, all that. We try to vary the content across the platforms because we understand that not everybody uses. I'm not on social media. The podcast is, and I understand that different people use different platforms. So we try to create different content for each platform. We'll see how long we can keep that up. But again, the big takeaway is if you want some free swag, send me an email, arcanecarolinas@gmail.com and say, Charlie promised me free crap because I'm the mail guy.
And if you want to find my books, again, I write award-winning horror, science fiction, and urban fantasy, and you can find every link to everything that I've got at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com.
Unearthing Paranormalcy. Where can we find you guys?
You can find us on all the podcatchers out there. We've also got our website, umpnormalcy.com. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at umpnormalcy. We're all a little too old for Twitter, so we don't use it too often. But we have it. And then our email is umpnormalcy@gmail.com.
I guess that leaves me. You can find my show at projectarchivist.com or Archivist if you prefer to say the name properly. I'm on Facebook. You can find our Facebook page there. Any place that you find podcasts, you'll find us. I think we're on Stitcher now. I think that we are also on Amazon Music. I just got an email saying that I'm on there. I don't remember signing up for it, but hey, I'm getting old. Just go out there and look for us and you can find us. I think you can just type at this point Project Archivist into Google and it'll pop our show up there. And right now I'd like to extend an invitation to both of your shows. If at any point you guys would ever like to come on my show and discuss what you do, you very much have an open invite. You can email me at projectarchivist@gmail.com. Whatever, if not, Jim here knows how to get in touch with me. So, just if you want to, and I'd love to talk with both of you guys about what you do and help promote your show as well.
And of course, I'm Jim Nuttles. You can find me at jamespnuttles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, and of course here at ConTinual because they never let me out of the chair.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
We'll see everybody next time.